Nigel Godrich is an engineer, mixer, musician, arranger, and most famously a producer of some of the most respected talents in music. Over nearly 3 decades, Nigel has been entrusted to collaborate with such artists as Radiohead, Beck, Paul McCartney, Roger Waters, R.E.M., Neil Finn, 07 and Air. Nigel is the son of a BBC sound supervisor and grew up recording random sounds on his portable tape recorder before taking up the guitar, inspired by listening to Jimi Hendrix and Frank Zappa. After visiting Elephant Studios in London with his band at the age of 16 and seeing an engineer at work, he decided to enrol at the School of Audio Engineering in London. After graduating, he found work at Audio One Studios, but found his role there limited and didn't really get much recording experience. It wasn't until later, when joining Rack Studios, that he would finally get to work on records by starting as a tape operator for producer John Leckie on the Ride album, Carnival of Light. Whilst working at Rack, he also had his first encounter with Radiohead, who he would continue to work with for many years. It was whilst recording the EP My Iron Lung and the second album The Bends that Nigel and the band struck up a bond that would lead people to call him the 6th member of Radiohead. It was when Leckie wasn't present in the studio that the 6 of them started to collaborate, producing tracks like Black Star and the charity single Lucky. After 4 years working at Rack, Godrich left to set up his own studio called Shebang, collaborating with future 07 member Henry Binns. He initially planned to create dance music there, but 6 months after setting up the studio, he worked with McAlmont and Butler on their debut album and had, in his words, a brilliant experience, learning a lot from Bernard Butler on the art of record production. It was also at this time that he was asked to co-produce Radiohead's third album, OK Computer. Having had huge success with their single Creep, the record company was keen for the band to follow this formula as the natural successor to the mantle Nirvana had created some years earlier. The band had other ideas though, and were keen to experiment, and with Nigel as their perfect partner, they set about creating an experimental yet commercially successful album that they could be artistically pleased with. At the time, Nigel believed that traditional studios were not necessarily the best places to be creative. He felt they didn't allow the artists to be comfortable enough to really immerse themselves in the music they were making. He said they were a bit akin to a public toilet in the way it was just a constant stream of different artists, and nothing felt particularly special. With this philosophy, the band initially set up in an old Apple store before renting a mansion. Essentially creating a home studio, they brought lots of essential gear to make the album in the time and space that they needed. Although still recording to tape, Godrich was using Pro Tools for editing by this stage, and not afraid to embrace new technology. During the same year, he was asked to mix Natalie Imbruglia's album Left of the Middle, which contained the huge hit Torn, that went on to become one of the most played songs on the radio for years to come. On creating the perfect pop songs, he commented that it was like completing a complex puzzle like a Rubik's Cube. It's an enormously satisfying thing to do, it's really not that easy. With these successes, the offers rolled in as he produced albums for Travis, mixing R.E.M's album Up and Neil Finn's Try Whistling This. I personally remember hearing both of these albums without knowing they were mixed by Nigel, but was immediately stunned by how they sounded. The same applies to Beck's Mutations, which he mixed and also produced. Trying to discern a common theme in his recordings and mixing style, it's apparent that he's bold in his sound choices, from contrasting very natural dry sounds with heavily compressed or affected sounds, thus using a full palette of textures. He's also a big proponent of the LCR panning technique. This is a simplified version to panning, whereby tracks within a mix are panned hard left, hard right, or dead centre. Nigel has often talked about his love of the immediacy of music in mono. In many ways, LCR can be considered an extension of the idea of mixing in mono. It's almost like treating the left speaker, the right speaker, and the phantom sensor as 3 semi-independent mono mixers. It's not the easiest way to mix a record, but it does encourage the engineer to make quicker mix decisions. This would be in keeping with Nigel's work ethic, as he likes to keep things moving in a recording session. Tom York has often said that Radiohead would never finish an album if it wasn't for Nigel's ability to make quick, objective decisions in order to finish a song. It's worth noting also that with this technique, if you want to maintain the LCR feel, you should also have your reverb set accordingly. For example, not sending a reverb from a track hard pan left and having it return in stereo. You can choose to place it left, which you probably mostly would, Or you can of course pan that hard right, creating a completely different effect. Either way, you're still not blurring the initial LCR approach. I've always felt that the drums in Nigel's productions sound great, and after some investigation, I found out that he quite often asks the drummer to play more softly than they would normally, presumably in an attempt to get more detail when using close ribbon mics overhead, then cranking the preamp, which appears to be often a Neve or an API when using his own rig. Nigel isn't shy about calling the shots no matter how big the profile of the artist is. After Paul McCartney had approached George Martin asking him to produce his next album, Martin instead referred him to Godrich, who, when approached, although thrilled at the prospect of working with one of his idols, stipulated that he would only do it if he got rid of his band for the recording, and instead insisted McCartney record all the instruments himself. He believed that some of McCartney's best work was made when working alone, as he was a fantastic multi-instrumentalist and capable of playing everything himself. Nigel's direction paid off, as Chaos and Creation in the Backyard was widely regarded as McCartney's best work for years. Songs like Jenny Wren and Fine Line were lauded not only for the songs themselves, but for the intimate, stark but rich soundscapes. Since then, Nigel has continued to work with huge artists, also creating his own side project, like the TV series From the Basement that featured many incredible performances amongst its 13 episodes. The idea behind it was to show the artists playing live at their very best, using the best audio and visual equipment possible. He was also part of the Atoms for Peace band that featured Tom York and Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers. Another band he features in is Ultra Easter. In this group, Nigel contributes bass guitar and synthesizer. Nigel's credits to date are staggering, but I'm sure he'll continue to evolve and be part of many of my future favourite records.